This is the Think Small for the verified testing team. It's April 22nd, 2021. Last week in the video that I'll link below, we started with Think Big around open metrics. Now that that standard is actually published, it's used by our custom metrics reports feature. So we're interested in exploring new use cases, the other ways that customers could use that, users could use that. Just to sum up, last week we talked about an ideal outcome for users would be to create custom metrics as part of their builds or pipelines, job timing, package size, total pipeline time. Those are some examples of things that they could track. And then see how those trend over time at the project level, probably roll that up then to the group level. One of the examples that Kevin from the release monitor team came to us with was a prospect he had talked to, somebody who wanted to gamify pipeline time amongst their teams, have a leaderboard of bits, which is super interesting. So grouping those things together either by group or some other logical unit, which is a whole other ball of wax can of worms that we've talked about for various other bits that we want to group together, not in our normal grouping logic. So that is our kind of high level ideal situation for customers creating and capturing custom metrics utilizing open metrics. Did I miss anything in our recap or from the notes that I reread this morning? All right, well, let's jump in. We talked about kind of the big vision. You have a awesome graph that shows you how everything you've defined for custom metrics is tracking over time. A bunch of other cool, smart stuff. Drew mentioned a lot of extra analytics that maybe we can make available. Like here's the 95th percentile, 99th percentile. Here's things that are outliers to that where you should pay attention. That's our long-term vision. Towards that, what could we do in our next milestone? If we put together an issue today for 14.0, what would it look like that takes a baby step towards that and minimum viable change style approach?
Put a number somewhere.
Put a number somewhere.
What number and where? I don't know. We have custom metrics in the widget. Yeah.
No, I like this idea. Put a number somewhere. This is great. Well, because something about this, what numbers what number would be easy for us to automatically put there? Right? To like essentially like seed the data structure. Right? So people aren't starting from nothing, right? Maybe they don't know what the open metrics format is off the top of their head. They don't have to Google it. Like we just throw in like any old dumb metric that says like the number of seconds your test suite took to run. And it's already there. So somebody could just look at it and like copy paste the line or something instead of needing to go look up the standard. Like any, like any number. Number of people who have commits in this merge request. 1. Like whatever it is. Which that if we put any metric in there, no customer will have to come up with their open metrics reporting from whole cloth. It's always easier for me to go into something existing and add one more thing just like it than it is to go invent the whole thing. So if we do the inventing with some dummy number, it should lower the barrier for everyone.
We have to make sure there was a way for them to get rid of our report. I guess they could just delete the artifact or something like that.
Well, if I remember correctly, it's this
Just
one
like a text
artifact
file.
with a format in it. And
Yeah.
it's like, have your brackets in here and your braces here and quote your strings like this and your integers like this. That like.
Yeah.
You
So they
got,
could just
like,
override it or something like that.
Yeah, if we copied like a README thing out of the open metrics documentation and put it in there.
Yeah.
So they could like type two word, they could replace our thing with a different number. Like,
But if you're doing
Just
it as
call
a
it
template,
auto open metrics.
yeah, if you're doing it as a template, you can include a link to documentation and other examples or a library of other examples, right?
yeah. Our template could write something. I don't know.
So if we just pulled something out of CI, for instance, because you have to be running a pipeline to utilize this because it's going to be a job that tracks it, right?
Yeah.
As total job time might be available or total pipeline time. Like that's always going to be something that you have if you run a pipeline. You might not have tests, you might not have deploys.
Right.
As you should have commits, maybe, probably, maybe not. trying to think about what is the most stripped down pipeline you could run.
Well, you might. Commits is tricky because you might be in a merge request and you might not. So what commits it? Like there will be a commit, but like number of commits on a branch pipeline, that's just going to be number of commits like in your main branch of all time.
I know personally I have a pipeline that just builds my code and does nothing else. It's not tested, doesn't matter. It just builds and then, hey, it passed, we're good. So I mean, that's probably the most basic stripped down pipeline that I can think of. There are open metrics that we can do off of that. I'm not sure.
Can we get timing like of the overall pipeline? Like if that's all we tracked and said, we're going to compare every single time. That's the very first baby step thing that we would do is give you your total pipeline time.
There's a problem. There's a time travel problem in there that we can't write the amount of time that a job has taken while the job is running.
Yeah. Forget about that.
Can we write the amount of time that we're at while it's writing? Well, like time from 0 to then?
Doesn't really give us much, does it though? I mean,
No.
Is there a way we can on pipeline completion edit an artifact or something? I don't know if that's I don't know if it's useful enough for us to add that ability.
Still the time travel problem where if it's running, then the pipeline's not complete. You'd have to use like a downstream pipeline and then reflect back on the first one.
This MVC gets complicated when you introduce parent-child pipelines to it. Yeah. Okay. There's probably something else, like number of jobs scheduled to run or something like that we can include. That is a little more, that is less
Job
time
scheduled
dependent.
is great.
Yeah, job schedule.
We know that right at the beginning. And so also just thinking that making the number especially useless might drive engagement because people might see it and be like, well, that metric is silly. What's that doing there?
Yeah.
And then they'll they'll go make it useful.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like a weird anti-pattern of like annoy your users into using your software.
I think
The
if you give them
metrics that you've
something
set up
that,
so far.
even if it's not useful, if it runs really quick and it's an example of how you could track this thing, that it encourages them to look into how might I use this to solve my own problems. If we then link them to a library or examples of other things that we track within GitLab, like, hey, we're tracking all of our gem sizes, we're tracking whatever else we actually track with custom metrics because we use it for a lot of stuff, that it will prompt them to figure out, oh, this is what I could replace that with. Apologies, Miranda,
Yeah.
I totally stomped over what you were saying.
It was mostly as a joke, but we could have the starting metric of metrics that you've set up so far, 0, just to annoy them.
Are we at
I
all
would track that.
concerned for customers that are concerned with storage space, artifact storage space?
As far as like this would be a big artifact for them.
I mean, it wouldn't be a big artifact because, I mean, the amount of, it's a text file. And so I don't know, we can probably count the number of bits that it would take for us to like take up. But if they're running like tons of pipelines, but they're still concerned about their storage for artifacts or something, I don't know. I'm just concerned that there's going to be a few customers that are like, hey, why are you automatically creating an artifact? We don't want this. How do we opt out of it without having to edit our CI config of erasing this file?
I wouldn't put it like when you create a GitLab CI YAML that this job automatically inserts. I would think about it as, here's a template that gets you started with custom metrics, and it just
Okay.
inserts. So they would have to opt into it still, because this is a paid
Got it.
feature
I was
anyway.
imagining, I was imagining that it was going to be an automatic, like, hey, you ran a pipeline. Here's open metrics for your pipeline.
Yeah.
Okay. A template makes more sense.
And we could even do it as an informal template, like not actually spin up a project, but here's an example of some syntax that you could use to insert. Go from there. Maybe beyond what we have already in documentation today.
Yeah,
I mean, there was benefit of running it automatically too, but I don't know. Drew, what were you going to say?
I was thinking it seems like more of a, not like include this template for the complete solution, but include this template as like, you're getting started with open metrics. Like you include this, but you'll be expected to expand on it because it's a completely open-ended porting system.
Cool. I think that would be a good MVC. That would prove out people actually want to use this if we see it start to be included, if we start to see more engagement with the custom metrics, both upload of data and the engagement with the MR widget, which we track both of those things on our dashboard. So we could track how is this trending over time. So moving on to, I guess, what's the riskiest assumption we're making here? If we're assuming things that if they're not true, it would blow up and we would never get to our ideal outcome for a customer.
I feel like we're assuming that people like open metrics.
Yeah.
Like people might see like, oh, I can include that template for open metrics and just like barf and never look at it again. Like we could get 0 engagement. To be fair, you might know that. I feel like I'm assuming that. So.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit last week about open metrics is still a little undefined. By and large, Prometheus follows it, but people follow this kind of the standardization that Prom has put together. And that would be the format. And that enables people to potentially output those artifacts or grab those artifacts and put them into other places as well. and for visualization
Is-
purposes.
Is the Prometheus standard a superset of open metrics?
I don't
Is
know.
okay, because it would be convenient if like open metrics compliance means it's Prometheus compliant. Just if Prometheus is like a de facto standard and there's a conflict, I mean, doing the open standard is kind of right in principle, but I could see it being harder to gain traction if people already have a Prometheus standard ecosystem and we're gonna be a conflict.
Yeah, we create a bunch of metrics that don't work with their existing Grafana dashboards or whatever it might be, right?
Right, and it could be some tiny little thing, but if it means they have to think about it, that could kind of kill the momentum.
Totally. Yeah, I think you're right on with that. That's a risky assumption that people want to use that. I think we've proved, or we have evidence that implies customers want to track additional things that we're not giving them as part of their builds. I think a lot of the really interesting problems to solve are around build metrics themselves, pipelines, which jobs take the longest. I think that we did I hadn't really thought about you can't get metrics on a pipeline until the pipeline is done running, so you can't do it within the pipeline problem before. So that's interesting to expose and think about. But I think there is appetite there to track other stuff as part of these pipelines, which is interesting. Any other assumptions around the use cases that we talked about, either the think small or the think big? So I'm thinking about both our think small and our think big, our ideal outcomes here and the things that we could potentially build in our next milestone. What's the hardest problem here to solve?
I feel like displaying the metrics in a consistent way, because it is so open-ended. It's not really like a solid chart that we can do other than, hey, this changed. So making a display that people can easily parse and quickly see the results from.
I think you're right about the open-endedness being like the chart is probably the most obvious place where this happens, but we don't know what people's solution is going to look like. Like we don't have an end goal to be like, oh, we can automate this much of the process. We have no idea where people want to go with it.
So we probably have to just be communicating with customers a lot.
Yeah. And internal on .com, we should probably do some monitoring, some informal, quiet surveying of metrics artifacts to see what people are actually using it for. That people want a time series chart is already an assumption of what kind of data is going to be in there.
Is that going against confidentiality if we open up their metrics reports though?
Probably.
So, I mean, the only other thing we could do, we could just we could just survey customers, you know, what are you using it for?
Yeah,
it's not going to be a complete solution, but always give us like a trend of like what people are primarily using it for.
You could probably dig into open source projects or public projects without a problem and start to poke around there and get some ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any place with public CI, I guess.
Invite folks from GitLab to make our metrics better, make different types of metrics that match up with the data types and chart types that we want to support. You're unfrozen, Scott. Maybe. Maybe not.
Cool. I think along with displaying that data is storage of that data. It's something that we're doing more and more often lately as a team in some of our feature sets, but that's always something to keep in mind how that grows, how we how we sunset data at the end, like what our window is, to keep those tables small potentially. Cool. So it sounds like our very first or next thing that I will create an issue for and I'll put it into 14.0 to start. It may end up into 14.1, which are next two refinement milestones out, to just create an example blurb of here is a single custom metric that you could use to get started. And from there, we can build on that with some additional documentation or example projects of here's things that we use in GitLab and what we track them for and how we act on the data as it changes. I think that would be interesting to go down that path and see how people are using this today or would react to those kinds of examples of how we use it today. Awesome. With 2 minutes left, any other things we want to dig into here on open metrics? Anybody want to just open up the format, the documentation, and read through it? You can pour over it and record that and put it on unfiltered.
James, record a 2-minute speed run of reading the open metrics documentation. Post that to our YouTube channel.
There you go. All right. Well, I'm going to take those 2 minutes, or now 1 minute that I get back, and try to go create that issue so that everybody can take a peek and comment on it and we can refine it a little bit. I'll drop it into 14.0. Cool. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Good session. Cheers.